going to talk a little bit about perspective, and not the perspective on like how you feel about certain things, how you draw. There's different kinds of perspective. We're going to go through all of them. We're only going to do a project on one of them. So when you see some of the ones that are a little more complicated, don't freak out. Why do we use perspective in our drawing? Anybody? If I'm not looking at the board? Yes. Yes. Do you know, think of what kind of jobs they use perspective? Huh? An engineer. Anybody else? Yes. An architect. Why would an architect need to use perspective drawing? I need y'all to wake up this morning. Why would an architect need to use perspective drawing? Anybody? Okay, if an architect is planning a new building in the middle of a city, kind of want to know what the other buildings around it are going to kind of look like, if we're blocking someone else's view, seeing what it looks like on the city block, right? Okay, interior designers. I'm sure some of you have played video games. Video game designers have to use perspective. Minecraft was an easy one. They use blocks. But think about when you're playing like a one-player game. Say you're in the middle of a field. My husband plays Halo. When he plays Halo, his character stands in the middle of a field, and the video game designer wants you to feel like you're also standing in the middle of the field, right? Okay. So we use perspective to turn 2D objects into three-dimensional objects, to at least give the illusion of a three-dimensional object. And then you guys gave me some great examples for jobs. Yeah, okay. Can I help this screen? Yep. No? Okay. Okay, so the three that we're going to really talk about are 1, 2, and 3-point perspective. And then there are some a little more tedious ones that we'll kind of glance over. The one that we're going to focus on is 1-point perspective. So what makes something a 1-point perspective? Does anybody know? So when you do 1-point perspective, you have what's called a vanishing point. If you look at all of these, there's a teeny tiny dot in the middle of the city. This one's a little easier to see. But what we do when we do 1-point perspective is everything is going to go back towards that center. Now, when you do your project, you can put yours in the center or you can off-center it. It's up to you. I'm going to give you the choice. But if you look at all these blocks, every single one of these lines is going straight back to the vanishing point. You can click for me. When you do 2-point perspective, you can think of it like this, like standing on a city corner and you're looking down both directions. So your vanishing point in these, look at the very ends of these rows. That's where they put their dots. 2-point perspective, 2 dots. Same with the boxes here on the city. If the rows were down here at the very end. This one's a little more complicating since it's a little more detailed, but it looks like they're at the very, very corner here, or maybe even off the page. For those that want to get a little extra creative or take an extra step, you're welcome to try the 2-point perspective. If you do, your dots can either be on your piece, or the way that we're going to create it, it can be off of your piece. And that way it kind of looks like it's going in a totally different direction. 3-point perspective is even a little bit more complicated. We're adding another vanishing point. So 3-point, this would be closer to like your architect, your interior designer. This is a great example right here on why an architect would use it. It's giving a really good example on if they're building this building here in the middle of the city, what is it going to look like against the other buildings around it? You know, if they've got a parking garage on one side, is that going to limit a lot of space from another building and things like that? So your 3-point perspective, you're just adding another vanishing point to connect all of your lines back out to. Any questions so far? Am I making anybody nervous yet? No? Okay. These are advanced ones. You are welcome to Google some of these. There are some really cool pieces out there. Think of these like fisheye, when you do panoramic views on your phone of photos and things like that. Those are more multi-point perspectives. They do make a really cool, I guess, like ending piece. However, a little more complicated. I put a couple of these up here. So perspective wasn't used for a long time. If you look at a bunch of history, art history, most things were painted on pots, flat surfaces, cave walls, things like that. They started trying to add depth by adding shadows and things like that, but perspective really didn't get started until like the Renaissance period. So this is technically 1-point perspective. Does anybody know how or why this is considered like a 1-point perspective piece? What tells you that it's like a 1-point perspective? I was going to say our center point is actually between these two. So if you look, so this all looks pretty flat, right? Until you kind of look back at all of our figures on the second row, and it's all these. Look at these lines here. And they're all pointing back towards that center. And the same over here. Everything looks pretty flat up front until you start in all these arches, and then everything's falling back. What other ways can you add depth to something that's maybe not perspective? Are objects in front of another smaller or bigger? So if Miss Keith is standing behind me, and I'm over here, and you're way back there, am I going to look bigger or smaller compared to Miss Keith? Bigger. Perfect. Okay. 1-point perspective / like linear perspective is a good way to think of if you're doing still lifes and things like that. Which if any of you guys are taking any college level classes as far as art goes, still lifes are something that you will learn to love or not. But you use a lot of perspective in that way, using your shading and your elements of design, which I know Ms. Keith has talked about. We talked a little bit about your vanishing points. This is a little bit more kind of outlining, that way you can see a little bit better. On your 1-point perspective, obviously in the center, but in this case, if you didn't want to center yours, think of if we put it over here, how would that change our perspective on that piece? You know, if we decided to move it this direction. Is it going to look a little bit more like we're standing on a sidewalk versus standing in the middle of the road? Like if we moved our sidewalk over in our vanishing point, gives you a little bit different point of view, right? Okay. And then the same goes for your double vanishing point. You don't have to put them right at the edge of your pages. You can move them wherever, and it changes the look of your piece. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. You all have a paper on your desk or table. I did it up here just so you can see it, but I also did one here. If you would like to do your vanishing point in the center, you can. If not, skip the center dot. But you're going to draw an 8x8 square. I measured it out. Should be 2 inches from the top, 2 inches from the bottom, and 5 on each side to get your 8x8 square in the center. So if you guys will take your rulers and measure your 5, 5, 2, and 2, and draw me a beautiful 8x8 square. Do it, or how I did do it. You're measuring from the top, measure down 2, and just make a couple of little dots across the top at your 2-inch mark, and then you can take your ruler and connect it all. Same for your sides. I would take your ruler, measure over 5, create a couple of little dots, and then make your line all the way down. And do that for each side. Wherever you put your dot, everything's got to come back to it. Keep that in mind. So in this case, I did a little doodle, and I did a city. Perspective-wise, it's like laying on the ground in the middle of Times Square, looking up at a bunch of tall buildings. Some of you said that this is something you've done before, which is great, so this should be easy peasy for you.